Well, good afternoon. Today we're looking at Psalm 102. What's interesting, I think, is that this is, of course, a prayer of the writer, and yet God intervenes or answers in the prayer itself. In verse number 1, hear my prayer, O Lord, and I've suggested many times that's a very good way uh, pray to the Lord, ask the Lord to answer your prayer, and let my cry come unto thee. Again, he says in verse number 2, hide not thy face from me. In other words, don't turn away. He's asking God to, again, answer and pay attention to him when I am in trouble. And that's still a good time to pray when you're in trouble and desperate need, and God is the only answer. Now, notice this. Incline thy ear unto me. Again, he emphasizes that in the day, and he asks God to answer him speedily, King James, or quickly. Now, I want you to see something in the psalm here. You have a contrast between that which is transient and that which is forever, that is eternal. In verse number 3, the writer says, for my days are consumed like smoke. In verse number 11, my days are as a shadow, and it declineth, and I wither as grass. You see, that's the way life is. Our beauty fades, our strength fades, and well, our life even fades. And in James, you recall that he says our life is but a vapor; it appeareth for a while. And as you get older, you know how true that statement is. But then there's a contrast between that which is transient, that which fadeth away, and I don't have time to get into this too deeply in our short time together. But sometimes what is transient, what fades away, is in that realization of life, that can be very challenging and frustrating, and that's why this psalm is so very important, especially for believers. Notice this: "But thou, O Lord," in verse number 12, "shall endure forever." See that contrast. God will, the generations will pass, beauty fades, strength fades, man fades, but God endureth forever, and thy remembrance unto all generations. Now, down in verse number 24, notice this. Now, the one who was writing is asking God to prolong his days, and this is what he said. Oh my God, take me not away in the midst of our years. Young people understand when a man gets old, he gets into his later part of life. We understand that the trail ends, life is about to end, and that doesn't astonish us. But when someone's in the midst of their years, verse number 24, I mean, middle age, that's very trying for life to end then, and evidently that's what's taking place in the psalmist. Take not away my life in the midst of my years, or in the middle of my years. Now, notice what's so very interesting in the psalm, and I wish we just had some real time to look at this, but if you notice in verse 25, again, this contrast of transient and permanent or forever. He'll say, of old thou hast laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy handiwork. Good thing to remember, isn't it? And they shall perish. Notice this. not only does life fade away, but he's talking about the very foundations of the heavens are the work of his hands, and they shall perish, but thou shalt endure. And they shall wax old as a garment, and vesture shall they be changed, and they shall be changed. But thou, here's the contrast again, but thou art the same, and thy years shall not end. Now, there's a very important verse in the latter part, but let me save that for a moment and just suggest. Now, remember, we just can't do this without some real deep Bible study. But what he had just said in the psalm here in 102 is actually quoted in Hebrews chapter 1. And what is very, very important to understand, God is speaking to the Son of God. That is, God the Father is speaking to Jesus the Son. And it's so revealing. Watch this. He'll say, let's start in verse number 7, and we'll do this very quickly, but boy, you can study it later. And of the angels he saith, who maketh the angels spirits, and to his ministers a flame of fire. Now, in other words, God the Father had never said this to angels, but unto the Son. Now God is speaking to his Son, and of course that's Jesus. Thy throne, O God. Now, did you catch that? God is speaking to his Son, and he says to his Son, thy throne, O God, is forever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. Now, notice this. Thou hast loved, speaking of Jesus again, get this please. Thou, that is Jesus, has loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, God, that is addressing Jesus again, what's he been saying? He said, God, he's speaking to Jesus, the Son, and said, God, thy throne is forever. That was promised in Psalm chapter 2. And then he speaks about how the Son, God, the Son, Jesus has loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, God, speaking to Jesus again, God is speaking to Jesus and said, therefore, God, even thy God has anointed thee. In other words, God the Father has anointed God the Son with the oil of gladness above all thy fellows. Now, notice here, here's the quotation. And thou, Lord, that is Jesus, in the beginning thou hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. That is the exact thing that was said in Psalm chapter 102. And they shall perish, that is the things that God the Son had created, they'll perish, but thou remaineth. See? There's that contrast, isn't there? Oh, we can't go much further right now, but boy, is that some good study. Now, notice there is that contrast to that which is transient. As we look on life on earth, everything begins to fade. He contrasts that with God, and then if you look at it deeper, he's speaking of God the Son, that is Jesus, and then he'll say in verse number 25, and I want you to listen to this. Thy children of thy servants shall continue. You see, there's something beyond this life, and we need to believe it, not just because we want to believe it, because it's true. You see, the servants, those disciples, those believers, those who trust in God and believe in Jesus as the Son of God, they shall continue. Even though we fade away in this life, don't get so frustrated. There's something better. So that's a great psalm to study. It needs to be studied deeper because it's just a tremendous psalm. But I hope that'll give you some insight to it and challenge you to read that just a little bit further because you'll find it so rewarding. And so we'll be talking a little bit later tonight, and hope to see you then.